What is the role of religion in our ever-changing world? From the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Issues of Faith.
How should people of faith deal with the political divide we see in this country? What about racism? What about the declining interest of young people in the church? This week we pause and we look back at some of our past interviews at a time when I feel like we could all use it. We start with our first show back in January 2020 when I asked how churches should navigate the political divide.
I happen to believe that the polarization that we see in our politics for many years now has been bleeding over into our pews. And so what we find are, conservative evangelical churches, more liberal mainline churches, and so that polarization actually continues within Christianity. The church where I serve here in Nashville, in Green Hills, we intentionally try to have a big tent church. And that's where we acknowledge openly we are not going to agree on everything politically. We are not going to agree on Donald Trump and whether we like him or don't like him. We're not going to agree on Nancy Pelosi, but we are going to say that the love of Christ and the things that bring us together can still be greater than that which divides us. And if our world and Christianity in general cannot begin to get that message out, then I worry about what the future looks like, because the polarization is happening in the faith as well.
Do you think it is good for a pastor maybe not to make his political views known to everybody? Is that even possible nowadays?
It's really difficult. I've always considered myself a moderate, and nowadays when you tell people you're a moderate, they say, oh, well, that's a cop-out, you don't stand for anything. It's like, no, I actually represent the group that needs more of a voice in this culture, because most people that are watching this program are probably caught somewhere in the middle. They recognize that something is wrong, something is broken, but they don't quite know how we're going to fix it. And I think the only way that we fix it is we start giving candidates that have a more moderate message, where they will work together, they will compromise, meet in the middle, a chance to be in office. And that's not the direction that our country has been going for some time now. And it's toxic. I mean, Ben, you know this. It's toxic. It's broken. The State of the Union last night, the president doesn't shake the speaker's hand. The speaker tears the speech up after it's over. I mean, every time we feel like, okay, surely this can't get worse, it seems to get worse. And so what will turn that around? I'd like to think that Christians could demonstrate a better way, but the reality is a lot of times Christians are a part of the problem, and faith is used as a tool for polarization, and that's discouraging.
I think we have aligned ourselves so much with a political party that when we become very radical, there is a fear that we'll lose our congregation, i.e. the money that the congregation brings. And so, as I've studied this whole issue in this country, I don't necessarily think that it's just a dark skin, light skin issue. I think we find it in scripture where it says the love of money is the root of all evil. We have an opportunity to be radical. But being radical means I'm going to go against the Republicans and the Democrats on many issues so that I can operate in the middle. And if I look at the life of Christ, that's what he did. He operated in the middle. I like to call it the tension of the middle. And that's where I live, in the tension of the middle. Right? I have some of my black friends that call me a sellout because I hang out with you guys. Then I have some of the guys over here that I'm not even good enough because I'm inferior to them. And so somewhere in the middle, I'm like, okay, God, because it's a radical thing to do. And so, yeah, churches that make that decision to be radical like Jesus, there are some consequences to that.
Every newspaper article you read about the new Metro Council, your name is right there, says very diverse council, and it includes you, the first Muslim elected to the Metro Council. So how do you feel about being identified in that way? First Muslim elected to the Metro Council.
When I started out, I made sure that my campaign was about the issues, about my qualification, about what I brought to the table, or what I can bring to the table. My faith was not even a part of the conversation, and I did not know at that point that I would be the first Muslim. It's great. I'm glad that we have the first Muslim because a lot of Muslims living here. But I'm also happy that people were able to elect me, not just for that, but for what I can contribute to the council.
What challenges do you think you faced being a Muslim? Were there challenges? Were there people that were concerned about the fact you're a Muslim?
Yes, there were challenges. As you can see, I identify as a Muslim in my practice, in how I look. And so that posed some problems because some people are of the notion that I'm running to impose my faith on other people. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about Muslim and Islam and what Muslims believe. And there are a lot of people out there that never met me. Some of them don't even live in Nashville, that has this idea that having a Muslim in council means that there will be an imposition of the Muslim faith on council.
And so there was a newspaper article about you were facing online attacks even during the campaign, from people saying, wake up, stop a Muslim from being elected, essentially.
And it's still going on. I still, every now and then, I still get somebody say, kick her out, impeach her, don't let her stay. Somebody started a Facebook page, not a lot of people on it, as a keep her out of government. And so then it was just a whole lot starting from the time that I announced.
Just how will your faith influence the work you do on the council? And it would be a fair question for anybody.
It is a fair question.
How does your faith influence what you do now as a council member?
Okay. So my faith has no place in my decision making as a council person. Because as a council person, I represent everyone, regardless of their faith. And so when I'm looking at an issue, I'm looking at it on the merit of the issue itself, how it benefits Nashville. My faith governs what I do, what I practice, what I believe, not what you do or what you practice. I have a lot of friends that are non-Muslim. And so we go out, they do what they want to do, I do what I want to do. And so that's the way it is. I'll give you an example. The first resolution that we actually voted on this first meeting on Tuesday was about granting a beer permit. As a Muslim, I don't drink. If somebody asks me for a beer permit, I'll be like, no, I can give you that. But as a council person, what I have to look at is there a reason to give the permit? Does the law allow that? Is it within the rules of the restriction, and does it meet all of that? Does the neighborhood okay with that? That's out, and I voted yay, because that's how I should vote. It's about the people, and it's about the rules.
If the church cannot figure out how to reach millennials, the church as we know it in a mainline form will be deeply challenged, because their children will most likely not come to church. So the churches have to figure out how to reach millennials.
What is it you think millennials are looking for, maybe that they're not getting? But I guess let's define millennials. Millennials are born between 1982 and 2002.
More or less, depending on statistics, yep.
And I like that you're doing this in a way that is affirming of millennials, because so often I feel like the discussion is, oh, millennials this, millennials that.
Yeah, you know, that is so true. We will say that they're lazy and they're narcissistic and egocentric and they don't keep commitments and their relational skills are challenged. But you know, I think for our generations, we can say some really challenging thing about us too that is pretty negative. What I have discovered over the years is that millennial folk are actually doing God's work, but they do that outside of church. And so this is the dilemma when churches would say, hey, what do we need to do to get young people back into the church? I'm saying that's exactly the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, how can we join young people who are already doing amazing things, even in this city of ours? How can we join them so that by extension they became church with us? We join them.
I read a book last year, and the author said the definition of white privilege is the ability to walk away. So if you don't like something that's going on, your privilege just allows you to just be done with it. We don't have that. We've never had that privilege. And so that's the reason why I say one of the things that I talk to my white believers about is, you know, you first have to make yourself aware. You've got to be intentional about doing some research. reading some different books that you didn't read growing up, being open to the facts behind the true history of this country and how that affects even what's going on today. We hear from some of our congressmen that, well, that happened years ago. Yeah, it did happen years ago, but what happened years ago still affects what's going on today. And until we understand what happened, why it happened, and begin to deal with that, then it's just going to continue down the same road. This racial tension has kind of hovered below the surface. And I think that because of the last two administrations that have come into office, in the presidential office, it has unearthed a lot of stuff, even in believers, it's a tragedy to me, but it exists. It's in our DNA. And so until we not only come to Christ for salvation, but until we allow Jesus to get to that part of our hearts that still holds on to some of those racial biases, I don't think we're going to get any further. But we have made strides. I mean, there have been strides that have been made in our country. I just think we got a long way to go.
It's been said many times the most segregated hour is that hour on Sundays of worship. And some people say, okay, that's a real problem. Some people say it's not a real problem. What do you think? The fact that is, if it's true, the most segregated hour? It's
an absolute problem, in my opinion. The body of Christ, the church, the universal church, is probably the largest and yet most segregated institution left in this country, right? And again, we've been given this ministry of reconciliation, so some kind of way we've lost it, right? And so, but Sunday mornings, it is still the most segregated hour of the week. And it's because of a historical issue that began with the white church not allowing us to worship with them, or even if we were in the same building, we would have to sit up in the balcony. And so because of that, two gentlemen back in the 1800s decided that they're going to start the first African-American denomination, and that's the AME Church. Mm-hmm. And so, people ask, well, why do we have a black church and a white church? Well, it's because we had to create something where we could worship and not feel the tension of racism while we worshiped.
And you say it will take a transformative intentionality.
Yeah.
So this doesn't happen without hard work, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think people go to church where they're comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think a lot of people would say, I'm not going to this church or that church because I don't like this person or that person. Mm-hmm. It's just where I feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. But do you think we need to move outside of that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I speak about often is, if we're going to exist in this body of unity, we've got to become comfortable with being uncomfortable.